Madam Deputy Speaker, we are appalled by repeated reports of mass casualty incidents in which Palestinians have been killed when trying to access aid sites in Gaza. Desperate civilians who have endured 20 months of war should never face the risk of death or injury to simply feed themselves and their families. We call for an immediate and independent investigation into these events and for the perpetrators to be held to account. It is deeply disturbing that these incidents happened near the new Gaza Humanitarian Foundation distribution sites. They highlight the utterly desperate need to get aid in. The Israeli government says it has opened up aid access with its new system, but the warnings raised by the United Kingdom, the United Nations, aid partners and the international community about these operations have materialised, and the results are agonising. Israel's newly introduced measures for aid delivery are inhumane, foster desperation and endanger civilians. Israel's unjustified block on aid into Gaza needs to end. It is inhumane. Israel must immediately allow the United Nations and aid partners to safely deliver all types of aid at scale to save lives, reduce suffering, and maintain dignity. It must ensure food and other critical supplies can reach people safely where they are across the whole of the Gaza Strip. Civilians, medical, and humanitarian workers and facilities must be protected. We will continue to be steadfast in our support for the UN and other trusted INGOs as the most effective and principled partners for aid delivery. Our support has meant over 465,000 people have received essential health care, 640,000 have received food, and 275,000 have improved access to water, sanitation and hygiene services. Just 2 weeks ago, my honourable friend, the Minister for Development, announced £4 million of additional funding to support the British Red Cross, enabling the delivery of humanitarian relief in Gaza through their partner, the Palestinian Red Crescent. That was part of our wider £101 million of support this financial year. Aid must be allowed in so this support can continue. Today, the UN Security Council is expected to consider a resolution for an immediate ceasefire, the release of all hostages, and the lifting of all Israeli restrictions on humanitarian aid, supporting delivery by the United Nations. We will once again use our vote in support of these goals. Following our leadership in coordinating dozens of countries to address the humanitarian situation and the joint statement by the UK, France and Canada, as well as the actions announced by my right honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary on the 20th of May, we will continue to convene international partners to increase the pressure and take further steps to address the catastrophic situation on the ground. We will continue to strongly support the efforts led by the United States, Qatar and Egypt to secure an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. As the Prime Minister has said, a ceasefire is the best way to secure the release of all remaining hostages and achieve a long-term political solution. The Israeli government's decision to expand its military operations in Gaza and severely restrict aid undermines all of these goals. Madam Deputy Speaker, we repeat our utter condemnation of Hamas, our demand that it release all hostages immediately and unconditionally. They can have no role in the future governance of Gaza. A two-state solution is the only way to bring the long-lasting peace, stability and security that both Israelis and Palestinians deserve. We welcome France and Saudi Arabia's leadership in chairing an international conference later this month. I commend this statement to the House.
I now call Shadow Foreign Secretary Dame Priti Patel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the Minister for advance sight of his statement. The scenes emanating from Gaza are harrowing and the suffering is intolerable. And the current situation we are all witnessing simply cannot continue. The level of humanitarian suffering and desperation continues to be unacceptable as children, women and their families continue to suffer while desperately trying to secure food and humanitarian aid. These deaths and casualties near aid distribution centres should never have happened. Can the Minister inform the House what discussions have taken place with Israel about these appalling events and the status of any investigation and what action will follow? Britain must at every level use its influence to bring all allies together who want peace and stability in this region, including neighbouring countries, as this current conflict is hurting civilians and now appears as if a sustainable end to this conflict has moved even further away. Are we working with our Abraham Accord partners and regional allies who also want peace, such as Jordan, Egypt, Saudi and Qatar? Britain must leverage its considerable influence in the region to help stop the endless suffering that we are seeing, to get more aid in, to see the hostages released, and to end this terminal situation with Hamas to achieve a proper, sustainable end to this conflict. And importantly, work towards a better future for the Palestinian and Israeli people. And to that end, can the Minister explain how the government plans to use the upcoming summit in New York to further these aims? On humanitarian aid, the government says that it continues to call for broader aid access, and of course we support that. But are there practical and specific proposals for the opening of individual crossings and entry points, and have these been presented directly to the government of Israel? The Minister will know that previously my noble friend Lord Cameron, working with allies, did secure commitments from the government of Israel to open up the Erez crossing and the port of Ashdod to get aid into Gaza. And at that time, he will also know that Israel agreed to extend the opening hours of the Karim Shalom crossing point. And we were able to achieve commitments just to increase the number of trucks entering Gaza, which naturally saw an increase in vital aid supplies, food and medical aid for innocent Palestinians. On British aid sitting in the region, the Minister has said in a written answer to me on Monday, and I quote, "Quantifying how much aid awaiting entry into Gaza is difficult due to the complex operating environment and limited real-time data, which we absolutely can appreciate. But what more can he do to secure practical information as to where UK aid is, who we can work with to move aid to key locations, and what more Britain can do to ensure that UK aid gets to those who are desperately in need of our support?" We also know that multilateral institutions, including the World Bank and others, are working on serious plans to deal with immediate as well as long-term issues to support the recovery and reconstruction of the economy in Gaza and the West Bank. What is the government doing to support that work, and what engagement has he had with those organisations? Madam Deputy Speaker, 58 remaining hostages still remain in captivity and now on 607 days of their cruel captivity at the hands of Hamas. They must be released. We are aware of initiatives put forward by the United States and that the latest proposals have been rejected by Hamas. So what pressure is the government now exerting on Hamas to get them to reverse their opposition to these plans? And on the West Bank, Madam Deputy Speaker, the government signed an MOU with the PA on the 28th of April, which we've debated in the House. Since that signing, can the Minister update the House on the PA's progress on reform and governance? Because it is credible governance that is required for long-term stability. On settlements, our position as it was in government, and that position is well understood. Settlements are not helpful for achieving long-term peace, and we'd urge Israel, for its part, not to take steps that could make a two-state solution more difficult, and to use its legal system to clamp down on settler violence. We support a two-state solution that guarantees security and stability for both the Israeli and Palestinian people. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, we want to lift people's eyes to a better future for the Israeli and Palestinian people. And to do so, Britain must actively bring our long-standing perspective and influence to bear in the region with all our allies.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the Shadow Foreign Secretary for her important questions. I can confirm that we are working closely with our allies, both in the region and beyond it, on this devastating situation. I saw colleagues from Jordan, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and Qatar in the Madrid conference 10 days ago, and I will be continuing my consultations with them over the coming days, as is the Foreign Secretary. She rightly asks about the status of the ceasefire negotiations. I'm sure she is aware I called on Sunday for Hamas to return to those negotiations. There has been some promising indications that they are doing so, but this remains a very delicate situation, and I will update the House when I'm in a position to do so with more solid information. We, of course, want those ceasefire talks to proceed with speed. We want a full release of all hostages. We want a permanent ceasefire, and we do not want Hamas in control in Gaza, and that is the objective of this government. The Shadow Foreign Secretary also asks the important question about where UK aid is and how much has gone in, and I'm grateful for her understanding on those points. I fear much of it remains in many of the humanitarian distribution centres outside of Gaza, blocked as it was when I saw it with my own eyes in Egypt.
Paula Barker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Minister for his statement, but we have been here countless times before. Last week, Israel approved 22 further settlements in the West Bank. Israeli Defence Minister Katz claimed it was a strategic move that prevents the establishment of a Palestinian state. Minister, what more evidence do we need to call this exactly what it is? A deliberate policy of annexation and genocide. Will the government now take the long overdue steps we've all been calling for years, namely the recognition of Palestine, sanctions on extremist Israeli government ministers, suspension of all arms sales and suspension of all trade? If we want to see a Palestinian state, we must do something now to prevent its erasure. The history books will not be kind to this government unless we use every form of leverage at our disposal. And our grandchildren will ask why we effectively stood by whilst a people were eradicated by bombs, by bullets, by starvation, and no doubt the further ethnic cleansing that is still to come. This should shame us all.
Minister.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for her question, and of course it was her urgent question that was granted this morning, which led to this statement. I don't agree with all of the premise of her question, but I can assure her that we will continue to convene international partners to increase pressure and take further steps as long as this catastrophic situation remains. We have taken steps. We have taken steps since we were first elected. We announced further steps on the 20th of May when the Foreign Secretary was at the dispatch box, and we will take further steps as we were clear in the joint statement between UK, France and Canada until the situation improves.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Callum Miller.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Minister for advance sight of his statement. I spoke yesterday with a British surgeon who has regularly visited Gaza to deliver emergency medical aid. He first reported cases of malnutrition 18 months ago and is deeply anxious about what he will find when he arrives at Nasser Hospital in southern Gaza later this month. People in Gaza are on the brink of starvation. Others are dying daily from gunshot wounds inflicted as they queue for food. The situation is intolerable and it is deliberate. The policies of Netanyahu's government amount to an indiscriminate assault on the Palestinian people. We must get the aid in, we must get the hostages out, and we must stop the violent, forced displacement of Palestinians in Gaza and in the West Bank. That is the only path back to a ceasefire. The time for timidity is over. Liberal Democrats have consistently called for the government to take firmer action. It must do so today. We called for the sanctioning of the extremist ministers Ben-Gvir and Smotrich 18 months ago. Will the Minister finally commit to implementing these, showing we will no longer tolerate calls for Palestinian dispossession? And will the government make clear that unless the Israeli government changes course, the UK will expand sanctions to those ministers and members of the Knesset who support continuation of the blockade and the current military action? Will the government finally ban the export of all UK arms to Israel? In his response earlier, the Prime Minister said the government was working with allies to get aid into Gaza. Can the Minister expand on what options are under consideration and when these could be implemented? Last week's announcement of 22 new settlements in the West Bank, the largest expansion in years, is intolerable. The UK should have no part in this. So will ministers introduce legislation now to ban all UK trade with the illegal settlements? Will the government use the conference later this month, together with allies like France, finally to recognise the state of Palestine, showing beyond doubt the UK's commitment to Palestinians' right to self-determination and a two-state solution?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson alludes to some of the commentary of some of the Israeli government ministers. I want to be clear that the UK government's issue is with Netanyahu's government. It is with the statements and actions of many of those ministers. I will not, from this dispatch box, as you know, discuss sanctions that we might take. But what I will say is that we watch very closely the statements which have come out. We have condemned them repeatedly, and they have not stopped, and they have continued, and we keep this under very, very close review.
Chair of the Select Committee, Sarah Champion.
Thank you. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Gazan Humanitarian Foundation is no such thing. It is a group of trigger-happy private security employees. Yeah. Yes. Under international law, as the occupier, Israel has a duty to those people in Gaza. Yeah. The International Court of Justice issued an advisory opinion on the 19th of July 2024 stating Israel's policies and practices are contrary to the prohibition of forcible transfer of the protected populations under Article 49 of the Fourth Geneva Convention. The government has still not given its response to this. And if I'm going to be very uncharitable and hopefully very wrong, this has created a limbo, which means the government is not using its full toolbox of sanctions, of prohibitions and legal accountability to hold Israel and indeed Hamas to account. When will the government act and acknowledge that they have duties under this advisory?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we continue to consider the ICJ's advisory opinion with the seriousness that it deserves, but I want to reassure the House that the powers of the Foreign Office are not set on our views on an advisory opinion, which is advisory. We abide by international law in all that we do, and our options are not constrained by the fact we have not yet pronounced a view on the advisory opinion.
Kit Malthouse.
Madam Deputy Speaker, as the Honourable Lady indicated, we're all frankly getting a bit fed up with the theatrics in this chamber, and if I'm honest with the Minister, it feels like the whole House is being played. He shows up, he mouths the words, full of condemnation and being appalled, and very occasionally the government leaks out just enough sanctions, frankly, I'm afraid, colleagues, to keep the Labour benches from open revolt. And yet, since he last appeared, as others have mentioned, 22 new settlements announced, and the Israeli government has replaced the UNRWA distribution system with a shooting gallery, an abattoir, where starving people are lured out through combat zones to be shot at. If the situation were reversed, we would now be mobilising, quite rightly mobilising, the British Armed Forces as part of an international protection force. So here's my question. What's the difference?
Minister.
I hope the honourable member will forgive me. He talks of theatrics, where I come to the House and provide an update, and he delivers a speech saying that we should do more. I just want to remind him and remind the House that the Labour government has a profoundly different position towards these issues than the Conservative government before us. We have taken a series of steps, most recently on the 20th of May, whether...
Order. Minister.
We have taken steps. We will continue to take steps. We have led the international community in the most recent of those steps. And I and we are under no illusion of the severity of the situation that we face.
Rachel Hopkins.
I do welcome the Minister's comments that Israel's newly introduced measures for aid delivery are inhumane, foster desperation and endanger civilians. And indeed, in just 8 days, 102 Palestinians seeking food have been killed and 490 injured. So what discussions is the Minister having with his Israeli counterpart about ensuring the protection of innocent civilians accessing life-saving aid?
Minister.
I regret to inform the House, Madam Deputy Speaker, that there is a fundamental disagreement between the British and Israeli governments about the nature of aid that needs to get in to Gaza. We have spoken to them, and we have been clear that the United Nations is ready with a system that works, that is able to deliver aid at the scale required to try and address some of the horrific desperation that we see. The Israeli government is clearly committed to the Gaza Humanitarian Fund with all of the problems that we see over the last 3 days.
Sir Jeremy Ryan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The policy of successive UK governments has been that the United Kingdom will recognise the state of Palestine when it's conducive to the peace process and to the ultimate realisation of the two-state solution. Up to this point, I have accepted the argument that the Minister and his predecessors have made that that moment has not yet come. But hasn't the balance shifted decisively with a succession of moves to greater territorial change in the West Bank by increased settlement activity and by increasingly blunt and frequent statements of members of the Israeli government that we are going to restrict Palestinians to a subset of Gaza or restrict Palestinians from Gaza altogether? That's what's changed my mind, such that I now believe it's necessary for the UK, hopefully in conjunction with others, to recognise the state of Palestine urgently. Why has it not yet changed the government's mind?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman, Madam Deputy Speaker, makes a very powerful point. And one of the reasons why the traditional positions of UK governments and many other governments across the world has been that the recognition of the Palestinian state should come at the end or during a two-state solution process was the hope that we would move towards a two-state. Many minds have been changed, like the honourable gentleman's, because of the rhetoric of the Israeli government, the clear statements by so many that they are no longer committed to a two-state solution. We see in the press many representatives of the Israeli government criticising others for considering their position in relation to a Palestinian state. Exactly as the honourable gentleman says, it is the action of this Israeli government that has made so many, including ourselves, review our position on these matters.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I ask my right honourable friend, the time has come for us to stop arming Israel in any way whatsoever. This collaborative pool of items that are gathered under the auspices of NATO seems to be a route through which Israel can be supplied. Is it not possible for us to withdraw the right for anything that we supply to that collaborative pool to be passed on to Israel, or to even influence our partners in that collaborative pool to stop providing any form of weaponry to Israel via that route?
Madam Deputy Speaker, let me first address my honourable friend's question about arms more broadly and then turn to the F-35s. We have taken steps to ensure that weapons directly for use in Gaza have been suspended. There is, in the F-35 programme, a provision, as my honourable friend outlines, for a global spares pool, which we do not control the operation of. I understand the argument sometimes made in this House that, in fact, we could control the final destination of those parts. That is a point that we refute and is being debated in the courts, and a judgment is forthcoming. So that is on the question of whether or not the final destination of F-35 parts could indeed be determined. And I'm afraid I have nothing further to add on that point. But I just want to be clear to the House, as the Minister for Trade was on Monday evening, that the arms suspensions that we have done are far-reaching. There have been some reports, Madam Deputy Speaker, suggesting that we have not taken far-reaching action, and in fact significant arms are still reaching the IDF. That is simply factually not true. There continue to be the sale of items which are controlled by the arms licensing criteria. That is because many military-grade items, for example, body armour for NGOs, we still judge are appropriate to be traded with Israel because they will go to NGOs who are going in. It is also true that we are trading components which will end up in use outside of Israel in NATO allies' arsenal. So, for example, of the £127.5 million of export licences that have been approved subsequent to our decision, 120 million of them were for components for a NATO ally, not for Israel. There is considerable confusion about this point, so I wanted to take the opportunity to clarify it.
Tim Farron.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Securing a ceasefire is vital. Securing the release of the remaining hostages is vital. And getting aid through to the suffering people of Gaza is an absolute moral imperative. And the Israeli government needs to ensure the safe delivery of that aid. And if it does not, then the members of that government should suffer immediate and severe consequences, no more prevarication. But will he also make an assessment of what the impact has been of cuts to the United Kingdom's aid budget on the ability to deliver aid in Gaza and elsewhere? And will he work with his UN colleagues to make sure that all the resources that could possibly be given from this government to the United Nations get through, so that aid gets through and stops the dying and stops the suffering?
Madam Deputy Speaker, to be clear, the issue in relation to aid getting into Gaza is not the availability of aid. The effect of the cuts which we have announced has had no bearing on whether or not aid can get into Gaza. And I know that because I have seen our aid with our very own eyes in warehouses in Al Arish. The issue, and we've got to remain focused on the central issue here, is not the availability of aid, nor is it the availability of partners like the United Nations prepared to go in and deliver it. It is that there is a blockade effectively in place by the Israeli government, and that is the central issue that must be addressed.
Rosanna Allen-Khan.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Almost 8 months ago, the UN Commission of Inquiry found that Israel has implemented a concerted effort to dismantle the healthcare system in Gaza, and that the killing and disappearance of healthcare workers amounts to the crime of extermination. UK doctors in Gaza describe it as a slaughterhouse, with the growing mountain of evidence detailing war crimes taking place, and our diplomatic efforts being totally ignored by the Israeli government. It is time to sanction Benjamin Netanyahu and the other murderous figures who are responsible. Minister, words are not enough. So today, here, now, in this chamber, I'd like the Minister to give us a concrete date as to when we can expect this government to impose sanctions.
Madam Deputy, I hear the frustration of the House, and I recognise, and I'm sure others too, will raise the reports, the deeply distressing reports of recent days, and indeed going even further back in both the West Bank and Gaza. Let me be clear, as the Prime Minister was clear with France and Canada, if Israel does not cease the renewed military offensive and lift its restrictions on humanitarian aid, we will take further concrete actions in this point. And I will not say from this dispatch box today when that might be.
Sir Roger Gale.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I concur entirely with the views expressed by the two Privy Councillors on these backbenches that have already spoken. We have for weeks been listening to fine words from the opposition the government front bench. And we've seen a lot of hand-wringing. And we've seen a vast amount of inactivity. And the question everybody is asking in this chamber of the Minister is when? Yesterday, the Minister knows this, 4 of us tried to deliver a letter to Downing Street calling for the immediate recognition of the state of Palestine. We weren't even allowed to deliver that letter. The time has come to act now. There is a route from Larnaca in Cyprus straight into Gaza. Use it. Let's save these children.
Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman for the force of his remarks. I would just remind the House, this is, and I hear so many colleagues say that they are fed up with my words, which is gentle. But on the 20th of May, we announce concrete actions. I am telling the House this afternoon that further actions will come if there are not changes. And I will return to the House when I am in a position to do. I hear everybody's frustration, but let us not pretend that the UK's position has not changed, that it has not continued to change, and it will continue to change while the situation remains as it is.
Tan Singh Desi.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there is a genocide case against Israel before the ICJ, and the ICC has issued arrest warrants against Prime Minister Netanyahu and others. In its 2007 judgment, the ICJ made clear that a nation's duty to prevent genocide begins when we become aware that there is a serious risk. Yesterday, the Minister confirmed in response to my written question that most of, or almost all of Gaza faces a critical risk of famine, with 500,000 innocent people facing starvation, which we know is caused by months-long blockade of aid by Israel. So I asked the Minister whether he has been satisfactorily notified that there is a serious risk of genocide occurring in Palestine, and will he ensure that the government takes all steps to meet our obligations to prevent genocide?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the question. We abide by all of our international legal obligations. We keep these matters under rapid review. He rightly highlights the risks of malnutrition and famine in Gaza as identified by the IPC, and we take very serious note of all of these reports as they come out.
Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I can't help but feel that the Minister is treating members with a significant level of contempt by telling us that something will happen, but won't tell us what that will be or when it will happen. But on a more acute point, can he perhaps clarify to the House why he believes it is consistent for his government to condemn the Israeli government for starving a civilian population, whilst at the same time providing them with the component parts to bomb a civilian population?
I'm surprised that the honourable member thinks there's any question about why Foreign Office ministers might need to leave some degree of ambiguity about when they take actions, including all of the ones that have been discussed this afternoon, sanctions, etc. These principles of why you might want to do things without pre-notifying the House. Each and every step, I think, are relatively well established, but happy to discuss at further detail why we do that. On the point about F-35 components, where we know they are going to Israel, we are suspending them. It is only because we are not able to control the onwards transmission of the global spares pool that this, at least theoretical risk exists.
John Pearce.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I would like to thank the Minister for all the work he's doing and the endless number of statements that he's had to make on these horrific issues. I absolutely agree with him and support him in calling for both Israel and Hamas to make sure that all humanitarian aid is available and gets to innocent Palestinians desperately needed. The best way that we can solve this problem is through a ceasefire. And will he join me in expressing regret that after Israel accepted the Witkoff framework proposals for a ceasefire, that Hamas decided to turn it down? And we must put as much pressure on Hamas to move forward with the ceasefire as soon as possible.
I thank my honourable friend for the question. On Sunday, I was clear that Hamas should engage in ceasefire talks, should return to the table, should release all hostages. A ceasefire is desperately needed and is the only route forward.
Sir Desmond Swing.
Studied ambiguity of what and when has had no impact on Israeli policy. We want to know, and Israel needs to know, precisely what the government means by further steps.
The honourable member will appreciate that in our private discussions with Israel, we have been very clear of the depth of feeling across the whole country and indeed in this House, and that further steps will be coming and the nature of them.
Debbie Abraham.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I think the Minister can sense, and I'm sure he can sense, the frustration across the House with all parties. and I support their frustration, really. We were at a meeting yesterday with the former UN Secretary General for Human Rights, Andrew Gilmore, and he said the lack of action that the international community is taking now on this issue reminded him of the lack of action during the 1990s and the Rwanda genocide. I think that's a lesson that we all should heed very, very closely. So I won't ask him everything that everybody else has asked about sanctions, around recognition. He knows where I stand on that. But I will ask him about the coalition of the willing for Palestine. We have a coalition of the willing around Ukraine. How are we building up our international allies to ensure that recognition and everything else that needs to happen has an international consensus? And again, we are looking at days, not weeks and months.
Minister.
I just want to acknowledge from my honourable friend that we recognise this conflict is being measured in hours and days, not weeks and months, and it's on those timelines that we seek to take action. On the question of a coalition of the willing, we are working with our allies, as I'm sure my honourable friend is aware. We convened the statement of 26 on humanitarian action and the leader's statement at 3, to which I referred earlier in my statement, and we will continue to work broadly, and I can confirm even today I've been working on those questions.
Ellie Chams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The UK government has an obligation under international law to do everything possible to prevent genocide. Yes. And yet we see genocide occurring in Gaza. The Minister assured the House a month ago that he was conducting risk assessment of the risk of genocide in Gaza. So will he give me a clear, unambiguous, straight answer today? Will he publish his most recent genocide risk assessment without delay?
As this House has heard from me before, the question that we assessed in relation to international humanitarian law was there a real risk of a breach of IHL? That was the assessment we made when we first entered government. That is a considerably lower bar than the questions to which he refers. We continue to make those assessments which cover the entirety of international humanitarian law. We have updated the House on that initial assessment, which is at a rather lower bar than she is suggesting, and the assessment broadly remains in place. We won't provide further updates, but if the position changes, I will be sure to return to the House.
Florence Eshalomi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do appreciate the Minister coming back to the Chamber, but as he can see from the strength in the Chamber, this is an issue that will not go away. The Minister just outlined to my colleague, the Chair of the Work and Pension Select Committee, that we are measuring this in hours and days, not weeks and months. We have a situation where there is only one kidney dialysis unit left in Gaza. The World Health Organization reports that the number of dialysis machines has decreased, and there are only 27 left in northern Gaza. My late mum had renal failure. She was on dialysis 3 times a week. It's not hours and days, it's minutes, Minister. A number of those people are literally surviving and dying within minutes. We see a situation where women, children, and many people are still buried under rubble. A number of us have spoken about the lack of aid going in and the fact that the aid is being used as a weapon of punishment. What more do we need to say, Minister, for us to see concrete and more visible action from this government? We are getting emails from our constituents. We need to see an end to some of the weapons going through that the UK is still supporting, and a clearer guidance on sanctions, because Israel are not listening to us.
I thank my honourable friend, and I recognise when we talk in this chamber about aid restrictions that can seem like an abstract concept, and my honourable friend is right about what that looks like person to person. The shortages of all kinds of desperately needed items that preserve life and dignity are in terrible short supply, and nothing about the last few days indicates that the new aid measures are doing anywhere near enough to try and avert that tragedy. We obviously not only make our own assessments, but we also pay careful heed to the assessments of others. I was a diplomat before. The International Committee of the Red Cross is a very sober organisation, not prone to strong statements, and the statement that they have made in recent days about the conditions in Gaza is very sobering reading. So we are under no illusions about the urgency and the gravity of the situation. I was pleased to be with the Foreign Secretary on the 20th of May when he announced further measures. We have been clear further measures will come. We are trying, as the Shadow Foreign Secretary has asked us to persuade the Israelis to change course. If they do not, we will return to this House.
Greg Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I listened very carefully to the answer the Minister gave to the quite right and proper question from the Honourable Member for High Peak just now. And will the Minister not accept that simply calling for Hamas to go back to the negotiating table is nowhere near strong enough, and that for there to be accuracy in this debate, it must be publicly and clearly acknowledged that the only blocker to a ceasefire deal that will get the hostages out and bodies returned of those hostages that have died is to acknowledge that the blocker is Hamas?
Minister.
We have condemned Hamas. I have condemned Hamas repeatedly, and we will continue to do so. A ceasefire clearly requires two parties. We welcomed Israel's return to the ceasefire negotiations. We called on Hamas to do the same. We are glad to hear that there sounds to be some progress. We will continue to press all sides on this point until we have a ceasefire.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yesterday, the United Nations Human Rights Chief Volker Turk said, and I quote, and it must have broke everyone's heart in this place, Palestinians will be presented with the grimmest of choices, die from starvation or risk being killed while trying to access the meagre food that has been made available to Israel's militarised humanitarian assistance mechanism. Minister, you feel like a record, but please, what concrete actions are we actually going to take in this place where you will stand at this dispatch box and do something to change Israel's psyche so they listen to the world?
My honourable friend asked me to change the government of Israel's psyche. We have been clear with the Israeli government the extent of our disagreement. Anyone who has followed closely the communications between me and my Israeli counterparts will see there is a profound disagreement in approach. We do everything we can to try and persuade our long-standing ally of why the steps that they are taking are such grave mistakes, not just grave mistakes for the region, not just grave mistakes for the Palestinians, but ultimately grave mistakes for the Israelis themselves. Our disagreement is with the government, not the Israelis themselves. It will be with regret if I return shortly to this House with further steps to announce, but we will do so given the strength of our feeling on these matters.
Monica Harding.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Minister has acknowledged, Israel's alternative aid scheme is dangerous, it is unworkable and it is profoundly insufficient. There is aid waiting on the border, UK aid that my constituents have paid for. You know the Palestinian people's desperation. You have heard the desperation.
Twice.
The Minister has heard the Palestinian people's desperation. He has heard the desperation in this chamber. So what new pressure will he bring to bear on Israel to open those aid routes? What is the alternative plan? And the Minister has asked for an independent inquiry into what went on in Rafah. Will he insist that the Israeli government lets the BBC and independent journalists into Gaza so that we know what's going on?
Minister.
The Honourable Lady makes an important point about the lack of international media in Gaza and the hotly contested nature of events there. It is not just me who has called for independent investigation, it is the UN Secretary-General as well, and that reflects the degree of concerns within the United Nations system in order to enable them to do their job.
Dawn Butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Minister, if we do not recognise Palestine, Palestine will cease to exist. Israel, as we've heard, and I commend my honourable friend from Liverpool, Wavertree, Israel has approved another 22 new settlement sites in the occupied West Bank, the biggest expansion in decades. It violates international law. Minister, Louis Theroux's incredible documentary, The Settlers, which I will be showing today, and he is in Parliament today, highlights the grim reality of the settlers and the mindset. Minister, you must agree that it is time that we have a strong debate. You cannot persuade... Pardon me, Madam Deputy Speaker.
The Honourable Lady's better than that.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the passion is overtaking me. Minister, do you not agree that we need... Minister, do you not agree? Do you...
Order. I am going to make this comment because people repeatedly keep addressing the Minister as Minister. They should be doing their questions to the Chair. Does he agree?
Absolutely, Madam Deputy Speaker. Minister. Madam Chair, does he agree? Will he agree? Can he agree that it's gone far enough? That we must have this debate and say we will apply sanctions to Israel, no more arms to Israel, and we will see Palestinians as people and help them to survive.
Minister.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friends who are just trying to make me, as a new member of the House, feel like everybody makes mistakes, and I'm grateful for the important question. As my honourable friend knows, we have taken action against those settlers in that documentary as well as others. I recognise that the situation in Gaza and the West Bank remains awful. We have condemned the 22 settlements that were announced over recess. We have been clear that further steps will be taken, and I'll be happy to return to the House when we're in a position.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister says he hears the frustration of the House, but does the government hear the cries of the orphan children of Gaza? Hear the cries of the children that have had their loved ones blown to bits literally in front of their eyes, who will be maimed for life? Now, I've been at many of these statements before, and I'm grateful for what the Minister said, and I'd like to also put on the record I'm grateful for what our Shadow Foreign Secretary said today as well. But the reality is that aid is not getting through. There were 400 UN stations before. There's only now a handful. They're in combat zones, and people are unable to access that aid. And every single day, men, women and children are being impacted through lack of food and access to aid, access to medical supplies, and actually access to fuel to actually cook some of this food, some very practical issues. So can I ask the Minister what more he can do with the Americans to ensure that this new way of delivering aid, which I, by the way, don't support, it should be the UN, but if that is going to be the case, that there are more aid stations in more places so more people can access it in order that we save lives?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful for the honourable gentleman's words. There are clearly profound issues with this new aid distribution mechanism. That is not just the view of the British government, it is clearly the view of the GHF themselves, given that they have suspended operations after 3 very bloody days, where clearly, exactly as the honourable gentleman says, there are insufficient aid distribution centres, very dangerous crowds, and we have seen terrible violence associated with these distributions. I would be very happy if there was a mechanism in place at this moment that could provide aid properly, but there exists, waiting on the outskirts of Gaza, in Al-Arish and elsewhere, a United Nations operation with 18 months of experience, yet longer than that, of doing this properly and making sure that everybody gets the aid that they need. We must not delay. We have both the aid and the delivery partners. We should let them in.
Liam Byrne.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The barbarism Benjamin Netanyahu's government against the Palestinian people is beyond belief.
Yep.
We should not be negotiating trade deals with this government.
Yep.
We should not have trade envoys on the ground, and we should not delay recognition of the state of Palestine. Now, our committee, the Business and Trade Committee, backed by my honourable friends for Slough and Rotherham, is determined to get to the bottom of UK arms exports. I am grateful to the Business Minister for confirming last night that he will appear before the committee before the summer recess. Can the Minister confirm tonight that a Foreign Office Minister will be alongside him?
I make it a habit not to confirm the schedules of my ministerial colleagues, and it's, of course, the Minister for Europe who has appeared before, with responsibility for the overall licensing regime, who's appeared before your committee. But if I could just be clear to the House, sorry, and it was, yes. If I could be clear to the House and, of course, the honourable gentleman, there is no effort to conceal our position on arms licences. We have set it out to this House on a number of occasions. The Minister for Trade set out some of the numbers on Monday. We have taken exceptional measures to try and show more transparency than is usual about the arms licensing regime. We are having this discussed in not just in this place, but in the courts as well. There is no effort on the part of this government to be anything other than transparent, not only with this House, but with the Israeli government themselves about the nature of our decisions.
Llyn Osmedi.
We can all see that a genocide is happening in Gaza, and it's about time that this government called it out for what it is. We are witnessing the systematic dismantling of Gaza's healthcare system, and the Red Cross has described the situation as hell on earth. What is this government doing to prevent Gaza's healthcare system from being decimated further and to re-establish hospitals and life-saving medical services?
Minister.
The truth is, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that while the aid blockade remains in place, there is very little that any outside partner can do to try and ensure proper health services in Gaza. I will not mislead the House by suggesting that there is. The aid that has come in from the GHF is far too little and far too geographically concentrated to be able to provide the kind of provision that Gazans are entitled to and that they should have, and is a clear necessity under international humanitarian law.
Tahir Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 20th of May, the Foreign Secretary informed this House that free trade agreement was being suspended with Israel. Less than a week after that announcement, the UK's trade envoy to Israel was in Israel. The Minister, in his opening statement, said, "We call for an immediate and independent investigation into these events and for the perpetrators to be held account." We know who the perpetrators are. What evidence does he need from an independent inquiry? Why does he not take action by suspending the UK's trade envoy, prevent him from going to Israel? Why does he not back the 800 lawyers, senior judges, retired, and academics that wrote to the Prime Minister earlier this week asking for Article 6 of the United Nations Charter to be invoked and expel Israel as a member state of United Nations?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the call for an independent investigation has begun with the UN Secretary-General, given, as I said earlier, his concerns about aid provision. The UK supports the role of the UN, its vital humanitarian role, and that is why we have echoed his calls. On the question of the trade envoy's visit, let me be clear. We suspended negotiations for a future free trade agreement with Israel. We did not suspend all trade with Israel, as I think the House knows. The trade envoy had no scheduled meetings with Israeli officials, was there as part of his regular duties, because trade does continue between Israel and the UK. And I'm not sure it's entirely fair to join the visit of a trade envoy in with the horrific events around the aid distribution centres of recent days.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister will be well aware that the Hamas have threatened to execute any Palestinian that dares to take aid from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. He will also probably be aware that there are strong reports suggesting that desperate Palestinians are breaking into warehouses that Hamas controls that are stocked to the eyeballs, literally, in the aid that we have provided. Now, we all want to see the aid provided to the Palestinian people. So what credible plan does he have to convince the Israeli government that if aid is flooded into Gaza, that it will actually reach the people that need it, rather than be taken away and stockpiled by Hamas?
Minister.
We are clear. The United Nations and its partners, in our view, have a clear mechanisms for ensuring humanitarian aid is met and to prevent diversion to Hamas. We obviously condemn any reports, any credible reports, where Hamas is diverting aid. But those reports should not be a reason why aid is not provided to the Palestinian people. There are tried, trusted and credible mechanisms waiting to get in, and they should.
Thank you
very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The International Red Cross chief has said that Gaza is worse than hell on earth. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, is it any wonder when children who have escaped bombs are now facing death because of starvation? The United Nations has said that 1 in 5 people in Gaza face starvation because of the blockade. Can I ask the Minister, Madam Deputy Speaker, does he agree with me that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is clearly incapable of addressing the starvation in Gaza? That's very clear now. And that Israel should immediately hand over any operation of aid to the United Nations?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the question. I think I've been clear on the point, but yes, the United Nations should be back, able to deliver humanitarian aid in the principled way that they have been.
Shockout Adams.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Ward Jalal was a 6-year-old Palestinian girl who last week crawled out of a burning school, leaving behind her mother and 2 siblings to burn to death. And the reason I mention Ward's name is because she was Palestinian. Last month, in the case of Al-Haq and the government, up to September 2024, 40,000 innocent Palestinian men, women and children, like Ward and her family, were killed. The government reviewed 413 of those cases. And out of the 413, they found one possible breach of international law. And that was the killing of the volunteers in the World Central Kitchen. Can I ask the Minister, does the government have any regard for children like Ward and Palestinian people in their concerns?
Madam Deputy Speaker, of course we have regard. Of course we have concerns for Palestinian people. The questions at issue in the assessment of risk are legal ones and complicated ones. And the reason they are complicated is because the cast of international humanitarian law ends up resting a great deal on what is in the mind of a commander when they make a decision. International humanitarian law is tightly constrained. It is therefore difficult to make conclusions about what is in the mind of a commander who will not share that thought with you. So that is why, when we make those determinations, we consider other limbs of international humanitarian law, not because we are saying that in all those cases it was proportional and necessary to the military objectives, but because where we cannot determine, you can look to other limbs of the assessment, and those limbs include the obligations on an occupying power, about aid being provided, and also the treatment of detainees. And those are easier tests to meet because they do not require knowing what is in the mind of a commander.
Now, I am planning to run this statement for a further 30 minutes, but members might like to think very carefully how many of their colleagues they wish to help get in and ask short questions and short responses, please. Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let us be short and frank then. I don't think for many of us in this House anymore it is complicated. Time has run out for ambiguity of action. Since the 20th of May, we've seen 22 more settlements. It is deliberately dangerous for people to access the aid. The IDF has declared the roads to the aid distribution centres as combat zones. We recognise that the Minister says they've raised concerns, that they have called for immediate independent investigations. These have not happened, not just in this incident, but repeatedly. The Minister won't tell us what he will do. It's on all our consciences to ask him to be clearer about that. So will he tell us what isn't on the table? Will he rule out things? He's telling us he's talking about future things. Will he rule out the immediate recognition of Palestine that many of us have been calling for? Will he rule out the sanctions that many of us have been calling out? Will he rule out the final abolition of the F-35 farce? Because if he does, at least we get some sense of where this is going.
Order. In statements, we need to have briefer questions. Minister.
Madam Speaker, I'll return to this House when I have further announcements.
Steph Ackeren.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Parishioners in the Matlask benefice have raised over £3,000 to support the people of Gaza and were visited last year by a priest from Bethlehem who shared how this conflict is impacting those there. They hope for the return of the hostages and for peace for the Palestinian people. I won't ask him to repeat the answer to the question of when, but will he confirm to them that the tools he is considering using at the next step include sanctions against extremist government ministers and formally recognising a Palestinian state?
I want to pay tribute to the work of your constituents, and I know so many constituents, including mine in Lincoln, are doing so much to try and both keep these issues on people's minds and take steps by raising funds as well. I won't be drawn on what the further steps might be taken. We were clear in the leader's statement that they could include targeted sanctions, so you can assure your constituents that that remains under review.
Mark Ferguson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Members have reached for the right words to describe what is being faced by the Palestinians. I think it's incredibly difficult within the constraints of parliamentary language and diplomatic language to convey that. I'm not going to go over any of the ground that other colleagues have, but does he agree with me that it is completely unacceptable on every level to pair aid with military objectives? And will he assure the House that in our future considerations as a government of where we go next with Israel, the unacceptability of those tactics is taken on board?
I want to thank my honourable friend from Gateshead who has raised these issues with me many times and is very focused on them. I completely agree with what he says. Aid must be delivered in a principled way. That is vital not just in the Middle East, but across the entire world, and we take these issues very seriously and we raise them with force with the Israeli government.
Kirsty Blackman.
In 10 years, in 20 years, in 50 years, none of us want to have to look back and say we could have done more. As of December, there were 191 licences for export of military equipment to Israel. Less than half of those were for the IDF and for the Israeli government. What comfort does the Minister have that that military equipment that is going to Israel is not being used to expand settlements in the West Bank, is not being used by those civilian staff working at these aid centres, is not being used to worsen the situation for the Palestinian people?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend for the important question. We take these issues very seriously. We have one of the toughest arms export licensing criteria and systems in the world, and we work very carefully to ensure that the words that I say and the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister say at this dispatch box are followed all the way through in every decision that we make. In some cases, it is absolutely obvious from the licence that they couldn't be used in the way that she describes. For example, components for a submarine can't be used in Gaza, but we do take enormous care over these questions.
Bel Ribeiro-Addy.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. An honourable friend from the other place reminded me of a conversation that she overheard me having with my honourable friend, the member for Coventry South, would have been October 2023. Israel had begun bombing the civilian population in the Gaza Strip, and my honourable friend asked, when will they say something? And as I often do, I said the first thing that came to my mind, and that is when they level it to the ground. And I have to ask the Minister, is this the change that we are waiting for at this stage? Because I've previously asked what our red lines are, and it seems that we have none. History will not look kindly on those who perpetuate genocide or those who assist it. And whether it's through the sale of arms or sheer inaction, does the Minister accept that this is now us? Now, the member for North West Hampshire pointed to actions that we might take, and I have to ask, why are these actions not good enough for the people of Palestine, and how many more people have to die before we do something?
My honourable friend asks me if I accept, I think the honourable lady said, this is us. I don't accept this is us. We are in a very serious disagreement with the Israeli government about the conduct of the conflict. That disagreement has been ongoing. It is strongly felt. Their policy in relation to Gaza and the West Bank is not the British government's policy. Not only have I condemned it, the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary have done so repeatedly. I hear the frustration of the House about further measures, but let us accept that the British and Israeli government disagree profoundly on this question, that the disagreement between us is deeply felt and British policy is as it is, not what the Netanyahu government is doing.
Caroline Voden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Hundreds of my constituents have written to me expressing their desperation and horror at the hellish scenes coming out of Gaza, so I speak here on their behalf. It is quite clear that the Israeli government aspires to wipe Palestine off the map as they expand their settlement ambitions with impunity. They don't care that ministers in Whitehall are watching their statements. Until Palestine is recognised as a state, the dispossession of land and homes by Israel will continue. So why won't the government stand up now, alongside our allies Spain, Norway and Ireland, and recognise Palestine as a state?
I recognise the concern of many constituents across the country, including in Lincoln. We are obviously in close touch with, I was talking to my Spanish counterparts on Sunday. I was in Madrid with the Irish and the other nations she mentioned at the Madrid conference with a whole set of states that have recognised a Palestinian state. And I recognise the desire right across this House, I think, for further steps in that area. What this House, I am sure, will press me on, whatever we do, is the continued horrors of Gaza. We are focused in everything that we do on trying to make an impact on the scenes that your constituents are seeing. We are considering these matters, but the question that we are focused on is trying to reduce the suffering in Gaza today.
Andrew Peggs.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I welcome the Minister's update for the House. But the Minister will know that the situation isn't just the horrors and inhumane violence of the Israeli government in Gaza, it is also the aggression we're seeing in the West Bank. I welcome the government's condemnation of the 22 new settlements and look forward to the words on the forced transfer from Palestinian villages that we are seeing this week. The Minister has described the Minister recognises the anger that this House feels and frustration. Could I ask him what more he would need to see happen before we take further action on sanctions against extremist ministers and action we need to see happen to recognise Palestine as part of the UN conference in coming weeks?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the 22 settlements are not only appalling, they are illegal. We have taken sanction steps. We have put in place sanctions against both individuals and organisations on the 20th of May. Clearly, that has not deterred Minister Smotrich and others from continuing to try and expand settlements in the West Bank. The viability of a two-state solution, of two states practically going to be able to live side by side, is being undermined, and we will continue to take action to try and to avert that.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister quite rightly called for an independent inquiry into Israel's behaviour in denying food, medicine and vital aid to the people of Gaza. In the same spirit, would he welcome an independent inquiry into the British government's policies in relation to F-35 jet parts, for example, because this seems to be becoming more and more mysterious. Yeah. Apparently they're sold into the global supply chain, but we have no control over what happens to them. They might end up in the hands of Israel, or they might not. Is he seriously expecting the House to believe that the manufacturers of these components do not trace them, do not track them, do not label them, do not identify them? I think the government knows exactly where those parts are going and exactly that they are enabling those F-35 jets to bomb Gaza and take part in acts of genocide. Does he not deserve an independent inquiry?
Madam Deputy Speaker, we have talked about these issues many times. They are in the High Court being discussed in a judicial review. At the moment, I do not see that this could be any further scrutinised and litigated, or what an independent inquiry on the position of the F-35 parts would achieve.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was very proud to join thousands of protesters surrounding Parliament today, demanding to know what this government's red line is. So, Minister, can you tell this House today Madam Deputy Speaker, can he tell this House what is his red line, and when will he stop arming Israel and stop F-35 bombers dropping bombs on schools and killing innocent children?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think I've addressed most of those substantive points already. We are clear in our position. We have set it out repeatedly, privately and publicly, and no doubt I will be back in this House shortly.
Vicky Slade. Deputy Speaker. Under the UK Strategic Export Licence criteria, licences are prohibited when there is a clear risk items would undermine peace and security, or under criteria 7, where the controlled items might be diverted for such uses. Can he confirm that export of all items, both with licences and those that sit outside the rules or have authorised exemptions, are being reviewed, so items like drones used for decoys and surveillance being used against civilians and aid convoys will fall under the restrictions, so these things do not go under the radar?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm going to hesitate in my answer just because there were quite a few clauses in the question and I don't want to get it wrong. The effect of what I have said in Parliament binds all of our export licences. There is not an asterisk or a footnote that allows some way around. This is a full-reaching approach which has been set out repeatedly in Parliament and is indeed being scrutinised by the Business Select Committee and indeed by the courts. There is no attempt to fudge the position here. It is as I have set out.
Louise Hay.
Can I recognise the Minister's personal dedication to this issue and his efforts in achieving a ceasefire? But it is impossible to conclude that this is anything less than a genocide. So on that basis, will he reflect the will of this House to the Foreign Secretary and to the Cabinet to impose immediately sanctions on Netanyahu and his genocidal regime?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I know my honourable friend, my right honourable friend, is committed to these issues. Determinations of genocides are for a competent court. I can confirm, as I did to the Liberal Democrat colleague, that we are considering further targeted sanctions in line with the three leaders' statement of recent weeks.
Ayub Khan.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Dr Al-Najjar, along with 9 of his 10 children, were murdered when an Israeli bomb hit their home. All this happened whilst his wife, another doctor, served at Nasir Hospital. We all know and we've all seen the many thousands of men, women and children lined up in a cage for food, shot as if there's some sort of game, hunting game. We know also that the former President Biden's spokesman, Mr. Miller, said to Sky during an interview that there was war crimes. He had no doubt. But he did not say this, even though he was aware of this when Biden was in power. Does the minister feel that he finds himself in the same position? Yeah. And if he does not, why does he not do what the thousands encircling this part of Parliament have done? Stop the arms to Israel.
Minister.
With respect, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I appreciate the honourable gentleman's commitment to these issues, it wasn't the badge or the protest that stopped the arms to Gaza. It was the Labour government. That was the effect of voting for a Labour government and having a Labour government. I have set out, I hear the frustration of the House. I have set out what we have done so far. I have been clear that we will go further. The badge is nice, but action is what matters, and that is what the Labour government has done.
Alan Hayes.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The President of the International Committee of the Red Cross has described the situation in Gaza today as worse than hell on earth. But the Minister has come to this House today with a message that is exactly the same as it was 2 weeks ago. He condemns the settlements, but settlement goods are still being sold in our shops. He supports a two-state solution, but he has not recognised a Palestinian state. He disagrees with the Israeli government, but he will not sanction their extremist ministers. It is clear that the government of Benjamin Netanyahu is not listening to the minister's words. In the context of the slaughter and starvation that we are seeing in Gaza, the government's position is frankly not good enough. When will there be further action?
Madam Deputy Speaker, I wouldn't want the House to have the impression that in the period of recess that the Foreign Office, its ministers and the whole of the government were not focused on these issues. We made statements on Sunday. We are working closely with our partners. We made a clear, on I think it was the 19th of May, made a clear statement to the Israeli government that there would be further consequences should the situation not improve, and I will return to this House when I am in a position to make further announcements.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can the Minister tell me how many more children must die before the government finally bans the sales and the export of all UK arms, including component parts, to the murderous Netanyahu's government?
Hear, hear.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think it's... I have seen children in Gaza. My department was able to get 2 of them out of Gaza last week. I understand the frustration of the House, but do not give the impression that what this government is doing is not deeply focused on the fate of children in Gaza. I hear the benches opposite laughing at 2 children getting out of Gaza. Of course, it is nowhere near enough. We hear right across the House the reports, but we are doing everything that we can, and we will continue to do so.
Jacob Collier.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister made reference to the joint statement with France and Canada on the 20th of May, and things have got worse since that point. Food distribution has been blocked entirely, and hunger is being used as a weapon, and innocent Palestinians are paying the price. So if that statement is to hold up, can the Minister say what action he is going to be taking with France and Canada?
I clearly can't bind the French and Canadian governments from this dispatch box, but we were clear that targeted sanctions would follow, amongst other actions, if there was not an improvement, and I can commit to the House that remains under review, and I will return to this place to provide a further announcement when I'm able.
Adnan Hussain.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister failed today to answer the question asked by the member for Argyle. Does his government believe Israel is committing a genocide? Yes or no?
It's a long-standing position. It's for a competent court to determine.
Laura Kirksmith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The approach of the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation flies in the face of every established principle of humane and effective aid delivery. As has become quickly apparent, the head of the organisation has resigned, and at least 42 Palestinians have been killed for simply trying to feed their starving families. This is an affront on all of us, on basic principles of human dignity and respect. Does the Minister agree that there has to be full accountability for these atrocities?
Yeah. My honourable friend was an aid worker. She understands better than most the vital importance of these principles, not just in the Middle East, but right across the world. And I join with her and the Secretary-General in her calls.
Nadia Whitting.
Madam Deputy Speaker, men, women and children in Gaza don't care that our government has profound disagreement with the Israeli government, and the Israeli government doesn't care either because they're continuing to act with impunity. It's quite simple. There is a genocide in Gaza being committed by the Israeli government. We are complicit in that genocide. We have the power to act, and we're not acting. What are we waiting for? Why have we not sanctioned Israel for its war crimes? Why have we not implemented a full arms embargo, including on F-35 fighter jet parts? Why have we not recognised the state of Palestine? We can do it because we did it for Ukraine. Why are we not treating Palestinian lives as equal?
Good point.
Yeah.
I thank my honourable friends for the question. She mentioned Ukraine. Our actions have consequences. The F-35 programme, and I understand that the House may disagree about the position the government has set out about the global spares pool, but it is the strongly held view of this government, including the Ministry of Defence, that we cannot stop sales to the global spares pool without harming the defence of NATO allies. At a moment of critical vulnerability for European security, the government has to act responsibly across all of its interests. Where F-35 parts are going directly to Israel, they are suspended. But we want the F-35 programme to continue not only for reasons of our own national security, but that of our allies, including Ukraine.
War. Madam Deputy Speaker, the horrific historic tragedy of the Palestinian people, and particularly the people of Gaza, is that they're at the mercy of two sets of extremists. The extremists of Hamas, but also the extremists of this Israeli government. National Security Minister Ben-Gvir said giving aid to Gaza is, and I quote, a mistake that delays our victory. Finance Minister Smotrich said, we are liberating Gaza and settling it. The Minister talks about further steps. Surely now is the time for us to sanction those individuals in the Israeli government to prove that we do not endorse such extremism.
Let me be clear from this dispatch box, we do not endorse such extremism. I won't speculate about sanctions from this dispatch box, but it has been clear in the leader's statement that should the situation not improve, targeted sanctions will be considered.
Clive Betts.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate, as the Minister of State, my right honourable friend is limited what he can say today from the dispatch box. But will he agree will convey back to the Foreign Secretary and the Prime Minister the extreme disquiet and unease across the House and particularly on these benches about the current position the government's adopting, and say to the Prime Minister, please come back next week and update the government's position and tell us that more sanctions are going to be considered and a recognition of the Palestinian state is also now on the agenda and going to be forwarded.
I thank my honourable friend for the question. The whole government, from the Prime Minister down, knows the extent of concern. I'm not sure that they necessarily watch all of these appearances, but don't be under any illusion that the whole government understands the strength of feeling in this House, in our constituencies, and right across the country about these issues.
Khan.
If this situation could not get any worse, we now have damning reports that Israeli fire is killing Palestinians trying to access aid at militarised distribution centres not sanctioned by the UN. It is a complete disregard for human life. Does the Minister agree that enough is enough and is now not the time to take immediate, stronger and further action against the Israeli government?
I share my honourable friend's concern about events in the Rafah crossing and beyond. The scenes from Gaza are intolerable, and I will return to this House when I'm in a position to do so.
Rachel Maskell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's clear that this House has no confidence in the government's handling of the F-35 programme. So can I ask the Minister this? What is to stop the government withdrawing from the programme and then selling bilaterally the parts to countries excluding Israel, ensuring that we are compliant with international humanitarian law and no component manufactured in the UK is being used to bomb innocent civilians in Gaza?
Unilateral withdrawal from the F-35 programme would have the effect of fully suspending the programme at a time it is required for global peace and security.
Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a disgrace that the Foreign Secretary isn't here, but unsurprising. Madam Deputy Speaker, the majority of the British public support a full arms embargo on Israel, yet this Labour government has continued to supply arms exports, including components for lethal F-35 fighter jets, enabling genocide, and those are not used in Ukraine, so that needs to stop being said at the dispatch box. The government has also defended this indefensible policy in court, claiming that it has seen no evidence of genocide. The evidence is overwhelming. We know it, the Minister knows it, the government knows it. So does the Minister understand that through the decisions he makes every single day, he is personally complicit in genocide?
I'd like to address the point about F-35s not being used in Ukraine. The importance of the F-35 programme to Ukraine is that the deployment of F-35s allows a redeployment of F-15s, which are used in the defence of Ukraine. We cannot, convenient though it would be to the House, you cannot divide up defence and national security in that way. I am confident in what I say from the dispatch box. The F-35 programme helps protect Ukraine.
Calvin Bailey.
Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Minister's statement and his efforts
But he must sense our frustration at the inability to arrest the situation that we're seeing in Gaza and the occupied territories. In the past few days, we've seen 58 people killed and many more injured in and around the GHF aid distribution sites. And those of us that have participated in UN operations in the past know that this should have been foreseen. It confirms all of our fears about what happens when humanitarian principles are disregarded. And let's be clear that Israel is continually and deliberately undermining the institutions of international law, and we need to respond more strongly. Israel isn't listening. Please, when will my right honourable friend announce sanctions on Israel's extremist government?
I want to thank my gallant friends who served in the RAF for a long time, as well as in the United Nations. These issues are desperate. We have taken, as he knows, actions against Israeli settlers, against extremists, and we've been clear, if the Israeli government does not change course, there will be further measures, including targeted sanctions.
Collins. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's clear to us all that the actions of the Israeli government are morally abhorrent, and I welcome the further sanctions that the Minister announced, the Secretary of State announced 2 weeks ago. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I plead with the Minister, we need to go further. We need to go further on sanctions. We need to consider trade measures. Like the Right Honourable Gentleman from Kenilworth and Southern, I too now believe it's time to recognise the Palestinian state. I was willing to accept the government's position on it, but I cannot any longer. Please, Madam Deputy Speaker, I beg the Minister to come back to this House extremely soon, tomorrow, next week, with further concrete measures.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I heard the force of my honourable friend's intervention, and I recognise the feeling right across the House of the need to see the situation in Gaza change, and that is an urgency felt by the government.
Andrew MacDonald.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is increasingly accepted that Israel's military operation in Gaza, having forcibly displaced and starved millions of Palestinians, having killed tens of thousands, amounts to a genocide. The latest feature of that is its aid distribution process, which today doesn't deliver aid. It is a dehumanising death trap that sees a child in a tent receiving treatment being shot in the head through the side of the tent. For the UK to end its condemnation of its complicity, it must pull all the levers to stop Israel's military action immediately. There needs to be a shift from condemnation and demands for Israel's compliance with international humanitarian law to a clear, unequivocal commitment that if Israel does not comply, that it will be forced to comply by whatever means. Will he make that commitment?
My honourable friend has got a long commitment to these issues, and we were discussing them through the recess. Clearly, the situation in relation to aid in Gaza remains absolutely desperate. We condemn the scenes. We did so on Sunday. We have been clear in our views about the new aid mechanism, but let us not escape the fundamental position of the British government, which is we oppose this operation in Gaza. We are calling on all sides to return to a ceasefire. That is what we are working towards.
Olivia Blake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I think that the Minister has heard today from colleagues right across this House the frustration that we've kind of heard and the contradictory things we've kind of heard today about from the Minister in response to questions, that there will be a change when there is a change, and there'll be new steps when there's new steps available, when there's this change. But in the same statement is outlining how Israel's newly introduced measures for aid delivery are inhumane, foster desperation and endanger civilians. Surely the actions of this week show that there is yet again another change, and now is the time for action and changing in our response.
I don't think what I've said has been incoherent, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 19th of May, we announced leader-level statements setting out our position. On the 20th of May, the Foreign Secretary came to the dispatch box to announce concrete new measures. I hear that the House would have liked me to come to this afternoon to announce further measures. We have been clear at the level of our Prime Minister, alongside our allies, both at 3 with France and Canada and with 26 partners, of the need for change. I hear from the House that they would like further measures announced this afternoon. I have committed to return when I'm in a position to do so.
Final question, Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I must take issue with the Minister when he said that it's people outside this place wearing badges and marches who aren't making a difference. What's the difference? The difference between members of the public wearing badges and marching is that's all they can do, whereas ministers in a government can bring sanctions, end arms sales and hold the war criminal Netanyahu to account. So I ask the Minister this. Quite rightly, this government in this House has labelled Russia's actions in Ukraine as war crimes, and accordingly they brought in significant widespread sanctions. When will they do the same in relation to Israel? Because otherwise this reeks of double standards, and Netanyahu will see the Minister and this government as a weak pushover and a joke.
Madam Deputy Speaker, let me be clear. I was not seeking to disparage the efforts of activists or protesters, but when the honourable gentleman asks when will we suspend arms to Gaza, we have suspended arms to Gaza. I hear the frustration of the House, but the Labour government took steps. I am proud of the steps we have taken. I hear the frustration to go further, but let us not pretend that this government has done nothing. It is deeply distressing, the scenes in Gaza. We have been clear, as I have been clear this afternoon, that we will take further steps if they do not change. But we have taken measures and we will continue to do so, Madam Deputy Speaker.